Welcome to the meeting, everyone. We'll get started in just a few seconds. Note that we are in meeting mode, so feel free to turn on your cameras. There'll be opportunities to engage and talk with our team and questions throughout. Hey, Benny, thanks for joining, being on camera. Christian, if you could make me a co-host, please. And I think, yeah, great. Wonderful. Okay, we'll get started in just a second. Feel free while we're getting started to go ahead and say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from, what organization you're with. It would be great to hear who we have with us today. Hi, Fatima. Thanks for saying hello in the chat already. Hey, Simon. Rosie's here, Oceanic Global. Ramiro joining from Patagonia. Awesome. I'm going to get started with the presentation. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is James Elsmore. I'm the CEO here at Island Innovation, and we have a large number of the rest of our team on here that you should see on the screen who will be joining for this presentation. The goal of today is to talk about the big thing next week, COP27, and communications, what strategies you can use for communications. To be honest, there are so many different directions we can go to. We're not going to cover everything in 1 hour that we could, but we wanted to give you a bit of a taster of some of the strategies that you all can implement for your work around COP. We have a mixture of people joining from a wide variety of organizations. So we've tried to make this applicable to as many as possible, and keep in mind the questions that many of you asked when you were registering. I know a lot of you are going to COP yourselves next week, or other members of your team are. And again, we'll try and make this relevant so it applies to you just as much, whether you're there in person or following along and supporting your team virtually. So just as we are about to start, I would love to hear from you. And again, this is a participatory workshop, so feel free to write in the chat, or if you're feeling really brave, turn on your camera and share with us virtually. What are you trying to achieve at COP? Like, what is your goal for going to COP? And specifically around communications, what is it that you're hoping to communicate? Because that'll give us an idea of the best things that we can talk about in this presentation and make sure it's useful for everyone. So, Mark, can I pick on you, as I just saw you come onto the screen as I was saying that? Mark Haver, what are your main goals for next week? When are you traveling to Egypt?
Thank you so much, James. I don't mind being picked on because I definitely wanted to chime in, so good choice. Hi, everyone. I'm with Sustainable Ocean Alliance as their North America regional representative. I'll be liaising between the other members of our youth delegation who are coming from the Gambia, Cameroon, Tanzania, Egypt, Turkey, Costa Rica, and I'm from the US. What I'm interested in is elevating our youth voices at COP27 and how we can build relationships with media to make sure that we move beyond the typical podcasts and social media opportunities to truly make sure that youth voices are represented in coverage of the event.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate that. Emily, I saw you come on screen as well, so maybe you'd like to share the goals from your side in terms of communications as well.
There we go. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for organizing, to James and the entire team. This is a great chance to get together. And I think for us at Peace Boat, where I work as the director, our main goal is really bringing the voice of civil society, especially youth from small island developing states and other regions of the world that might be underrepresented at the conference, to have a stage in the blue zone, the green zone, and outside, and then trying to communicate that with, again, young people who are also watching from elsewhere who couldn't attend the conference this year. So just trying to spread that message. And then we're also announcing our new design for EcoShip, which is Peace Boat's next vessel to run on solar and wind power. So really excited to work in the maritime, island, community, and oceans and climate action. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. Anyone else who'd like to share? Okay, I think I have the sound issue sorted. Great. Well, I can see a few comments in the chat, but we'll come back to those. And I'm going to go ahead and share. I know a lot of you are already aware about Island Innovation, but just very quickly for those of you who are not, we essentially have 3 components to our organization. We're a media platform where we create our own content and information and events around sustainable development issues for islands. We're a network, so we aim to bring together people like you, stakeholders working in sustainable development and on islands around the world to share information. And we're a creative agency that delivers communications and PR services for clients working in the sector, including some going to COP next week. Myself and Vincent, who'll be talking soon, will both be there in Egypt on the ground in COP, but we have a whole team behind the scenes that are working to support this work, and we'll tell you a little bit more about our platform as well, and how you can participate and benefit from what we're trying to offer there for islands around the COP. In today's workshop, we had 2 main areas that were of interest to people that we'll try and cover. So firstly is around creating content, and would love to hear what your own content creation strategies are for the COP. So ideas of how to create relevant content and useful content for your own audiences and communities, some of the different themes, and how also to define some of the traps that people have fallen into with climate change communication around the COP. And then the second part, we had a lot of requests about media, how to engage with different media organizations. And so for the second part, we'll concentrate on that, give you ideas on crafting narratives and how to really connect with journalists for those of you looking to get your work covered based on our own experiences, both for Island Innovation and for the different clients that we are working with. And there'll be plenty of time at the end for discussions and question for anyone that wants to take that further. So now I'll invite my colleague Thais Maciel, who's our Director of Marketing, to take the floor and talk a little bit about content creation. She and the rest of the team are leading the work around our own content for the Island Pavilion. And so I'm sure you'll have plenty of interesting things to share. So over to you, Thais.
Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this session today. So there were many people sending a message to us through the form, saying that they are willing to create relevant content. And we had an internal discussion about how to be relevant, how to make your content relevant. And one of the things that we highlighted during this conversation is that it may be very challenging to engage people while you are there in Egypt, while you are attending the various events, side events, and activities during COP. But creating content around your visit and your experience can be a huge benefit to share with your home audience. And I think that creating relevant content is about understanding your audience. You cannot be relevant to everyone, it's impossible. So the first thing you should be doing if you want to really create relevant content is asking yourself, relevant to who? So what is your target audience? Are you trying to communicate with policymakers in seed nations, for example, or entrepreneurs in the Pacific, or negotiators at COP? Who is your target audience? You need to understand who you are trying to communicate with. This is the main point. And by understanding that, you can also research what topics and angles are most relevant to them. For example, are you trying to communicate with an audience that is interested in climate change in general, or is your audience interested in a specific aspect of the COP event? And what's their level of knowledge? So all these questions will help you define what kind of content you will create and even what channels you will use to distribute this content. A tip is, if you already have your content personas, it might be helpful to review them. If you don't, now is the time for you to create your content personas. So some key factors to consider while defining your target audience are their age, gender, location, language, career, their interests and activities, their motivation and priorities. So all those aspects will help you to understand what kind of content will be more relevant to them. And there are some basic tools that can help you understand the audience that you already have. If you are trying to increase engagement, for example. So the first one is Google Analytics. Google Analytics will show you what kind of people are accessing your website and the pages that they are visiting, and it will also give you a lot of information about their location, language, gender, age, so you can find all these information there. And also the analytics tools of your social media channels. So Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn analytics are also very helpful. And Google Trends help you understand what are the topics that are being discussed through the internet. So if you scroll, for example, climate change or COP27 on Google Trends, you will see how many researchers, how many people are researching for those keywords on Google, and it will help you select the best ones for you to work in your content. You can move on, James, please. Okay, after you understand your audience and what's most relevant for them, you should be defining your language, themes, and key messages. So key messages are the main points of information you want your audience to hear, understand, and remember. I know that COP27 can be a really broad event in terms of discussions and topics and negotiations, but I'm sure that you can find 3 to 5 key points that you want to communicate to your audience. Some examples of what could be the beginning of your key message are, so our organization is the first one to do something, or we are the only ones covering that event, or we are the only ones having this interview with that person. And if your why, if your motivation to be there is particularly inspirational, this can also be your key message. So here we are trying to differentiate your content from all the content that will be created around the event, targeting your specific audience. Here's something useful. So the COP27 presidency vision will have thematic days. If you access the link at the bottom of this slide, you will visit the page where you can find all the information about each thematic day. And one thing very helpful is this PDF. You can find it on the same page. If you download the PDF, you will see the subtopics that will be discussed on each thematic day. So a good exercise is to go through these themes and select the ones that make more sense for your organization and your audience. This is what we did also for our daily bulletins during the Island Pavilion. So this is very helpful to for you to define what to focus on. You can go, James.
Yeah, I was going to add as well that one of the challenges is there is a slightly confusing organization of how these dates are laid out. You might notice that some days don't have any theme and some days have two. So I wanted to flag that. That's a particular quirk of this year's organization and how it's set up.
Yeah, we actually reorganized the thematic days to have only one theme per day for our daily bulletins because it would work better for our audience. So this is a tip for you that you can also reorganize this. So once you define what your content's gonna be and what's the audience you are targeting, you are ready to choose your communication channels and define the format of content you will create. So if you were going to send information through a newsletter or through email campaigns, which is what we are going to do, the format of content that you should be creating will be more text and images, maybe a video or something that you can include in your newsletter and email. If you were focusing on your website as the main platform, then you can create, for example, a blog post or infographic or opinion piece on something that is particularly relevant for you. And if you are focusing on social media, I think video is a great format because it's very engaging. People really like watching short videos, not 30-minute videos, but something between 1 to 3 minutes for just highlights, and shorter videos like 5 to 10 minutes to go more in depth in some subject that is particularly relevant for you. And then once you have defined your channels and the format of content that you will create, you can develop a content plan that will be very helpful for you to organize everything and to follow, and for your team to follow a strategy. And to help you with that, we are sharing a template for a content calendar. You can access it through the link that is on your screen right now. This is the same content calendar that we use internally for Island Innovation and for our clients. So it will help you organize all your social media content, email, blog posts, everything. So it's a very comprehensive content calendar, and it even has a tab where you can define your personas or target audience specifically for this event. I hope you find it useful, and if you have any questions or difficulties, you can always reach out to us.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key things when thinking about the content calendar is, are you trying to communicate with people who are at the COP, or are you trying to communicate with your home audience? And for a lot of people, I know a lot of people are organizing panels and events and things during the weeks. And it's super important that you get COP attendees into those events in person. But now with the growing opportunities for hybrid events, I know there's some logistical challenges for those of us organizing events in the blue zone in terms of internet, etc. But creating, getting the photos, event summaries, and even better, if you're able to, the recording or live stream of the event is an amazing way to communicate with your audience back home. And obviously we have a very wide range of organizations here, but people are very interested who are not traveling to Egypt. These people are very interested to follow your work and be able to do that. So the more photos, videos, everything that you can collect. I always see that there's a real focus of organizations. They go to COP and they focus entirely on other people going to COP. But as you know, if your agenda is anything like mine, there's way more events than you can actually go to. And so don't forget everyone back home or in your wider community who is not traveling there that you can really benefit from sharing information with. And I'd love if anyone here has any inputs and would like to share their own ideas for content strategy, then now's the time. You can raise your hand and I can call on you if you're feeling brave, or you can type something in the chat. I saw Mark's comment in the chat. saying that also November 16th theme is Biodiversity Day and is Ocean Action Day. And I know that's relevant. A lot of you working in ocean field here. So that's really important to look at all these thematic days taking place and how you can leverage those. And then also the comment about reels on Instagram. And I know some of you will be very aware of this trend of photos as a reel, even taking a photo and putting that up as a reel in video format is a way to get more attention, as the reels on Instagram have just boomed. Maybe some of you are also running TikTok accounts that can, you can use the same content on both of them as well. Emily's got her hand up, so over to you, Emily.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I was just going to mention, maybe as a suggestion here, something we can even do together in this working group of the communications team is if we made any specific graphics. I know a lot of our partners have already started. I was just going to share in the chat an example of one of our partners from ACE, so the Action for Climate Empowerment. This is the ACE delegation, and this is just an open format kind of graphic in Canva. And a lot of people have been sharing resources in Canva so that it can be collaborative and people can add their own profiles and share why they're going to COP and what they're planning. So I don't know if you have anything like this that you're doing for island innovation, or maybe we can do, some for island nations and have different island countries at the bottom and people can show where they're from. But I think this is really good for COP. And it's been done in the past, and it's interactive because everybody wants to participate, and it's helpful because it's easy. And then I was also just going to say, having any videos leading up to COP, it's something that we've done in the past for World Oceans Week with the United Nations, but maybe creating a short, also collective video, like something that highlights, all these different partners are attending COP, youth voices, island nations, and governments, private sector, and kind of highlighting the stakeholders. I think that could be a fun way to engage people in building up momentum.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Emily. Super helpful. And to add any of that content like this that's being created, do share with us for our team, because we'll be releasing our daily bulletins on island information. I know we're already working with Emily, but for other people who are running panels or creating information or want to organize interviews, then get in touch with us, because we will be publishing that through our own platform. Just to add on the videos as well, I think it's really important to just use your phone. Sometimes people get really obsessed on the quality, and it doesn't have to be, you're not the BBC. You can go for basic recordings on your phone that actually do a really good job and in a way seem more real to the audience watching. Maybe it's harder if it's like a whole panel recording, but for these shorter videos and reels and things, that's great. And that link's in the chat. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? We'll also have time at the end to share some strategies.
Just wanted to mention that we created a very nice frame for the island pavilion that you can add your pictures to if you want. I'm sharing the link on the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Thais. So Mark has his hand up as well.
Thanks, James. One of the things that we're planning to do at COP27 is to merge communications oriented to an audience both at COP27 and outside of COP27. We're going to ask each of our youth to do a day in the life Instagram story takeover. This is a great way for them to introduce themselves to our audience, introduce their perspectives on the conference, share for an outside audience what's going on at the conference, what does the conference look like, what does it mean to them, and also for them to be able to show people who are at the conference what they're thinking from a youth perspective. They're really easy to schedule, and they're great to coordinate with thematic days as well. So that might be something that other people will want to implement as well.
And I think especially important, given that we all know the logistical challenges this year. At previous COPs or pre-pandemic COPs, there was a much higher presence of youth and activists to participate. And I know so many who are not able to attend this year because of these either cost, visa, or logistical challenges in getting there. So I think having both the people who are fortunate enough to attend in person, but also those attending from afar is really important to integrate that. That's awesome. Okay, so the next section we'll go on to, and we can, these two link in really well. I think the content that you generate and your engagement with the media is so important, but a lot of you specifically asked us about how to leverage the media. And so we wanted to share with you some of the strategies that we use and how we can, and things to avoid, I guess, when you are pitching the media. There is a ton of media interest around the COP itself. And so if you're there or you're doing work that's relevant, it's great to be able to leverage that and jump on that to also help your own work get some recognition. And so I'll ask for this first part, we're going to talk about crafting a narrative and some of the basic pitching strategies. So I'll hand over to Vincent Duringer to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, James. Hi, everyone. So as James said, I'm Vincent. I'm quickly going to run through some tips and tricks for effective communication and pitching and really leveraging the content that you are creating. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can after my section. So the first thing that you want to work with your communication is your narrative. So your narrative is what will drive interest in your pitch, your story, your press release. Essentially, most of the content that you're going to be creating, you need to be able to have a good narrative that will engage journalists or an audience. And so to get them to pay attention to your press release or your content, you need to show them as clearly and concisely as possible why their audience should care about your news. So this means finding what makes your story unique and really leaning into it. One thing to keep in mind when crafting your narrative is that people may not realize the information that you take for granted is important or how it necessarily works. So explaining everything in simple terms and linking them to key points will often help. So try and stay away from using jargon or complicated language unless you're approaching a specific outlet, and making sure that everything that you are expressing and all the content that you are creating really puts in focus key things that people may not have thought about. And if you're able to draw to specific examples or explain how they fit in a wider issue, especially with COP and all of the topics that are going to be discussed, it helps put things in context. And it helps also highlight why it is that it's important that you're working on these key points. But once you have your narrative, it becomes very important to grab the attention of the media. So on the next page, thanks. If you are pitching media, it is easy to see what media houses are covering the same topics as yours, or specific journalists sometimes who are specialized in your sector, or the topic that you want to talk about. Now, you don't necessarily want to message these outlets that don't match with your scope of journalists because you're not going to get an answer. So you need to really be able to do a bit of background research and look into, okay, who's the environment correspondent or the finance correspondent at The Guardian, say, or at a local paper that you're trying to pitch. You really want to be able to give yourself the best opportunity to leverage media by hitting the journalists that are going to be willing to discuss your project or your content with you. So connecting with the right organizations or people, and leading with a line, for example, like, oh, I read your latest article and liked the point you made on XYZ, but have you considered this? And then having a short message that hooks them with what you are talking about, will want them to reply to you, because obviously then they're like, great, maybe I haven't thought about this, or maybe the example that you're providing is something that they hadn't necessarily considered. And so these are all things that are going to help you with getting a bit more traction there. And obviously that also means creating a headline that grabs attention and inspires action off the onset. And then you should be able to ask yourself, why should anyone care as you're writing your content? And then your content should be answering that answer, or that question, sorry. And trying to make sure that it's hitting all of the key points that you are trying to make. So with COP27, again, you're going to have a lot of different themes that people are going to be discussing, and depending on your sector or the organization or project that you're working with, you're going to want to be able to make sure that you valorize it in the best possible way. That also means, considering exclusive info, pics and opportunities, and including multimedia assets, quotes and tweets, anything that's essentially new content that they might not have seen, or content that can also then be linked to other things that they have been working with. And by embedding that social proof in those resources that these journalists can use, you save them time and context, and it also provides them with a bit more trust in terms of what it is that you're providing. You're showing them that you know what you're talking about, and you're highlighting points that maybe they've considered or not, but you're also backing it up with your own projects and your own ideas and quotes. So some of the quick tidbits I want to mention as well is you don't necessarily want to send media assets as email attachments, because they will sometimes end up in spam folders. So make sure that if you're wanting to pitch someone a specific video or something, make sure that you mention that, oh, if you're interested, I also have a video that I can send you later. So then as part of a thread, you don't necessarily send off content that is not also going to be used, but it can also be used to hook in media. And then it's also very important to make multiple versions of your press release to cater for specific audiences. So, you know, depending on the country, depending on, you know, the state even, or the sector that you're in, if you have a press release or content that can be catered to just fit specific narratives or specific contexts, make sure that you put a bit more time into just making those few tweaks and then sending out those press releases, because you will get more traction once local reporters or international reporters are able to see the context of your content. So yeah, those are just, that is just some of the magic behind communications, so to speak. And I think we also have a template available for you to help with meeting some of these goals. And it might seem, I don't know, a bit easy to listen to, but the key thing that we need to remember is when you are presenting information to someone, you are the person with the authority there. So making sure that you become that trusted person, or making sure that you present that information well enough, it will essentially make sure that the person that is covering it will understand what you're trying to get to. And then that means that their audience and your audience will be able to understand what you're going through.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vincent. That was a great insight into the narrative setting. As you mentioned, the link is here. Hopefully someone will drop that in the chat in a second for a template press release idea. So you can create your own press release for any of the work that you're doing. But I think my key takeaway from what Vincent just said is really about putting yourself in the shoes of the journalists you're pitching to, getting to know them, and remembering that the people writing the stories are people, the people that you're sending them off to. Journalists, especially now, have really, really demanding jobs. We're expected to produce a lot of content in a relatively short period of time. And so your story might be the most interesting thing in the world, but if it's going to be hard to write about or complicated, it may be that it doesn't get picked up for that reason, because you're not presenting all the information and making it clear and easy for that journalist who might have a few hours to put a whole story together. You're not presenting it all on a plate and making that easy. Also looking back at the stories that they've written recently. So don't pitch a really specific, detailed information about loss and damage to someone who only occasionally writes about climate change, right? If you're getting into those real details, look at who is covering the complicated parts of the negotiations. If you are, say, pitching about your, let's say, I don't know, Seychelles youth delegation going to the COP, and looking at local media in Seychelles as an example, then talk higher level about the role and why that's relevant locally. Just putting yourself in the shoes of whoever you're pitching to, looking at what angles interest them on a personal level and what they've written about before, and not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, which ultimately is not going to yield interest in the work. I think it's really important also to build personal relationships, and this is really about trust with the journalist you're talking to. This takes time. It's not something you can do instantly, but if you're creating a trusting relationship, they know that you are sending them relevant and interesting information and not just spam to 1,000 other journalists at the same time. That's really, really critical. They believe that you're providing them with reliable information and that you're only coming to them with something that is useful to them. It's really important to remember most journalists are getting minimum 100, if not 1,000 pitches in their inbox in a day. So your first challenge is just getting them to open your email. You might write a fantastic pitch, but realistically, people are getting all these emails and they don't have time to actually read them all. So firstly, having name recognition, that when they see your name coming up in their inbox, they actually open your email is absolutely critical, because otherwise, as I said, you can write a fantastic pitch, but if no one's reading it, then what's the point? Another way that you can really do this is by using social media. Twitter has traditionally been the place of journalists. Let's see what happens under Twitter's new ownership and the direction that it goes. But still, Twitter is a really powerful tool for these events. You can interact with their posts, you can follow them, you can give comments and develop a relationship in that way. If you're showing a genuine interest in something that a journalist is already writing about, and you're helping to share their articles, then that's going to build trust, that's going to build interest and some name recognition. And it's a nice way to be able to build a relationship when you don't necessarily have the ability to be face-to-face interacting with those press. Sending out press releases is great, but a press release on its own, sending out and blasting that out into the darkness, is not necessarily going to convert into actual press coverage. And so that's where the personal, sometimes time-intensive work of focusing on individuals is important, and looking at a few relevant individuals as opposed to just sending out your press release to hundreds and hundreds of people is actually going to be a better and more effective use of your time. So this process was actually is a way of sharing information. So I'll start off by the flag. I'm going to talk you through a process which was originally created to help people in an interview share their story in a way that relates to a journalist. But I also think applies just as much when you're talking about pitching a story as well. So how you get a journalist interest and you continue that conversation. So your first step is flagging a statement. When you flag a statement, you're saying something important and grabbing their attention. This is really important, like what Vincent said before, about relating to that individual and what they've written about before. So flagging something that you know is of interest to that journalist and planting that flag, grabbing the attention as a way to then move on to your next part of your pitch or of your interview. Bridging your statement. So your work might be really specific, really niche. So how is that relevant to a wider story? In this case, the wider story is probably COP27, but depending on what you're doing, it could be something else as well. So your work on its own might be interesting, but is that journalist going to think it's interesting to their wider audience? So if they can include your specific project in a wider story about COP, that's ultimately going to make it more likely that you're going to be picked up. So bridging is essentially working out how your story can apply to other areas. And again, just as important in pitching to make it more likely that you're picked up, but also in an interview to make sure that you're linking to other subjects that that journalist might be covering. And then thirdly, the hook. How do you keep the attention, keep them hooked, and ask them follow-up questions in an interview? You want the interview to last longer and ultimately get more of your information across. So by hooking, you can provide that morsel of information that keeps them engaged. Again, if you're pitching an article, the hook is really critical to make sure that you can actually go from, okay, I'm interested, to yes, here is a relevant story. So we can talk about through some more, but I think this process is a really good way of thinking whenever you're interacting with a journalist. So flag, bridge, hook when you're preparing for interviews, and you can put it on presentations. Hopefully some of you will be having live interviews at the COP itself in person. I know some of you already have got those lined up with big international outlets, which is really amazing. We're working with a number of our clients to ensure that they're working with those. But in many cases, they're also doing interviews for media back home that are not physically present at the COP. And so again, thinking about how you can make this relevant to the media organization that you're talking to is really, really critical in that. I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So we'll wrap up in a second, and feel free to already put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Before I pass over to Audrey, I think one critical point I want to get across is that once you've got press, you might have a fantastic story written about you. What do you do with that? I think people often think that getting press coverage is the end. What we found is you might have an interview on a really big international outlet. We had one of our clients interviewed last year, at the end of last year, for the New York Times. That alone does not drive traffic or drive interest in their project. People often read an article, but they don't necessarily go straight to the website. Of course, it drives some interest, but I would say it's about 20% of the value of press. So if you do get press coverage, you need to think about how you leverage that and make sure that it's actually being read. So you can communicate that to your existing audience through a newsletter, through a blog, through social media. Of course, you want people that you already have a relationship with to read that article, and it helps them build trust and understanding. But also keep using and making sure that people are reading the article and are coming back ultimately to your site. So don't just think, okay, the job is done, I've got the media article, that's it, I'm moving on. But how can you leverage it, going back to the content conversation we had before, to really demonstrate that there is interest and attention for your work, and then your funders or your partners or your stakeholders can read that, and it adds to the credibility and impact of the work that you're doing. We have one quick case study. We can share a link in the chat to some more of our case studies as well, of some of the work that we've done. We recently did a project for the High Ambition Coalition on 30 by 30. And in this is a really good example of this. We had over 50 media placements in just 1 month for their campaign, but then we're able to reach much more impact by leveraging those on social media to actually build momentum around this campaign and ultimately drive significant stakeholders in the region to sign on and put their weight behind that work. So you always have to be thinking, how does this media impact actually, how does this media coverage actually translate into the impact of what I'm doing? Because media is great, but media for media's sake is not really the point. We're all doing important, impactful work. So how can you leverage this media coverage and drive that to drive the work that you're doing and see the wider results on the projects that you all are working on? So I'll hand over to wrap up to my colleague Audrey, who will tell you a bit about the Island Pavilion and how you can get in touch with us. And then afterwards, we will go to questions, answers, discussion. This is really an open forum, so I'd love to hear from you. Audrey?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here with you today. So we created a place, and each year this is the second pavilion that we are creating around COP. And the idea is to bring all the islands news and organization in one place, which is the Island Pavilion at COP. This will be a virtual pavilion in order to, at some day, to have our own Island Pavilion at COP physically. But the idea is today to be able to be the place for you to know everything that will happen at COP that relates to sustainable development and islands territories. So you'll receive, if you register on this Goldie button that we have on the website, you'll be able to have all the information, all the events. We have a daily bulletins. and you'll know basically everything that will happen at COP prior. So that we'll announce the program of the day after, and also everything that happened at COP during the day. It's actually quite a good way to get to know what is happening, even if you're there on site, and if you're not, to have a better idea on the different actuality. And aside from that, we also we will create some events around it. James will be on site, we'll do some interviews on site, but if you did not plan anything yet for COP, please reach out to us. We can discuss on how we can create something for you around COP, and using that space, the Island Pavilion at COP, for you to leverage also your voice if you have not done it yet. And we'd be very happy to discuss with you about that.
Awesome. Sorry, my Zoom is not letting me unmute quickly today. Not sure what's happening. So here's Audrey's contact information as well if you're interested in reaching out to her. Also, I'm hoping that for all of you, the virtual agenda. So we're trying to create an agenda in one place of anything that's island related. A lot of you have already submitted events for inclusion on that. So you can go ahead and reach out to us, and we will include those in that virtual agenda, along with the daily bulletins where you can send press releases or summaries of your work that we'll distribute. We did a similar model for the Lisbon Ocean Summit earlier this year, and we were really pleased that we were getting interest not only from people following from a distance, but actually people who are on the ground attending, saying, actually, this is a really helpful summary with all the chaos of everything happening around to know what is happening and how we can use that. So I'll just stop sharing my screen and would welcome any questions, comments, ideas from anyone else that you'd like to share.
You're muted, James.
Sorry, I see a question from Trina. If you'd like to go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, excuse my voice. I have a little bit of allergies today, but I was wondering if you had any tips on how to be as safe as possible for social media posts, especially if we're under the assumption that a lot of the Egyptian authorities may be monitoring some of our posts, especially if we are advocating for certain things. So if you had any advice or tips on what to do with that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that specifically applies to people who are maybe involved in any form of protest or anything that could be considered protest. I presume that's where you're coming from. And I have heard a mixture of things about how the Egyptian authorities are specifically dealing with that. I'm sure others have heard other things as well. There was, I believe, and I can try and put it down for you, there was a webinar that happened yesterday that I think specifically addressed this issue and probably has people who can answer it a lot better than mine. But just from a personal opinion, I will be very careful about posting anything that does show you or other individuals, and be aware of other individuals that are doing anything that could be considered protest. I think it's really hard to know right now what that's going to look like in reality on the ground. I also know that the Egyptian authorities are under a lot of pressure to allow this from global governments. Does anyone else have any comments specifically on this issue? Maybe others in the group know more than I do. No. Oh, Emily.
Well, James, I kind of agree with you. I would just be really cautious. I did join the security briefing that you just mentioned yesterday, and there was quite a lot of talk about, not wanting to have any kind of graphics or, whether it be something you wear, like stickers or flags or other things. So obviously always out, especially, just because they're specifically looking for that. So, just be careful. And I would say not to post as much of, extreme content. If you see it, don't repost it necessarily. Make sure, you read thoroughly through everything and check your facts.
Yeah, and as I said, be very aware of if you're posting things that could get other people in trouble. But I think, well, that will become very clear after the first few days of what that looks like. But I do have a feeling it's going to be very different to the past, where there were huge marches going through the city, and in most of the COPs I've attended, I think there've been a big displays of public unrest. But thanks for that question. And I will try and track down. I don't know if it was recorded, or Emily, if you happen to have the recording, but if you send me an email, I can try and track down it and connect you with it, Trina.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Emily, you had a different question as well?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of like I guess a suggestion or question. I don't know for everyone here, but I was going to put in the chat an example of the Nature for Life Hub, which recently shared their social media plan with everyone. And I was wondering if this group or others thought it might be useful to kind of have a team to create something like this, where we could have, for COP27, here's all the partner organizations joining and their logos. If we want to highlight each other's, like Partners Friday, or do some like campaigns together, have a Trello board and insert it. I don't know if this is in anyone's capacity, but thought it might be a good example to follow if we wanted to create something.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing. We'll let someone volunteer in the chat if they do want to be the coordinator of that. I know there's a lot of different things going on, and the more we can do to coordinate, definitely helpful, and appreciate all the work that Emily's done bringing that together and helping us coordinate. Benny, you had your hand up with a question.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, sweet. Well, this is gonna be my first COP, and as someone who got my badge all sprayed today and I'm still wrinkling out the housing, do you guys have any advice as people who've gone to conferences like this on how to just manage such a chaotic thing, like keeping track of where you should be, what you want to go to, resources to look out to stay up to date, etc.?
Yeah, and this is, I think, my 6th COP, and I still feel overwhelmed and it's chaotic. So don't worry. It's a huge event, and of course, every year is very, very different. There's so much happening. I think you can't try and go to everything. Also, I know in terms of Sharm El Sheikh, there are different centers. There's obviously the Blue Zone itself, but then there are a lot of things happening in different hotels and other areas. So I think you just have to try and prioritize and choose the main things. And don't get exhausted with yourself, because you can't do everything there, and you can't take every opportunity. So you just have to draw a line and say there's, that's enough at some point, that you're doing things. But I'm sure it'll be an amazing experience for your first one. I invite anyone else to share any other comments as well on that. One of the challenges which is partly why we're running the Islands Pavilion, is just information. Because I'm on so many different lists and WhatsApp groups and all these other things, and all the information is very different in different places. There is not a comprehensive space that brings all of this together. So you do really just have to keep your eyes peeled for different bits of information and events, etc. We're trying to do that, to bring it together specifically for islands, because trying to do it for the whole COP is pretty hard, I would say. Did that answer your question, Benny?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. I saw a relevant question as well from Rosie in the chat. So just wondering how to gauge which media outlets will be in attendance, how to reach out, and if there are any tips for engaging with them at side events. So my first comment would be, it's really hard to get the media to show up to your side events. For that exact region that I just told you, there's a huge number of events taking place and a relatively small number of journalists there in person. So if you're finding it hard to get media to show up to your side event, then you're probably not the only one, unless you have something that manages to rise above the noise, then you may get them. But it is hard to get media to show up to your side events. I would also consider the media who are not there. The media who are in attendance are most likely going to be covering the details of the negotiations and a lot of the very technical things, and also the big speeches from international leaders. So do think about, how do you engage the media, we kept saying that word back home. Obviously, it depends on your organization, but if you're focused from a specific region, they would love to have a person on the inside, let's say, who can share information relevant to your country or island back there. So that may be one way to approach it. Or it's hard to know, not knowing specifically your area of work, but if you're in a specific industry or a specific sub-interest, then maybe you can focus on media that deals with that. So we have one client that's very focused on the lithium industry. Lithium is a vital mineral that goes into all batteries and renewable energy. So it's really important for these conversations. And they're talking about how to make that process more sustainable. That's very, very niche. And so may not be of interest to all the people working across all of COP. Climate change is so many different things. And so again, what is your subcategory that is more relevant that you can focus on? You might be more successful going really niche than trying to appeal to everyone talking about climate change when there's going to be so many other people competing for that same space. The last thing is your side events. So as I mentioned before, recording them, taking photos, writing summaries. A lot of you are putting a lot of work into your side events. And I know what it's like to put a huge amount of work and get 20 people show up. And be lucky if you get 20 people show up. And I would really consider the value in your side events being after it's actually happened. So communicating what you did, what was discussed, and using that to create content, I would say is more valuable possibly than the people you get in the room, because that can sometimes be really challenging and you don't know until it starts who is actually coming. You can have 50 people say they're coming, but will they actually be there when there's all these other things happening at the same time? Great. I'm sorry, I'm just looking through the chats, but feel free to raise your hand as well if you either want to make comments or questions before we wrap up. Grace had asked, do you know of any platforms for listing the COP27 side events? So you're welcome. We'll put our contact details in the chat. Thais has already put the form in there, which is great. You're welcome to submit forms for anything island related in its broadest sense. I know that's fairly vague. So if it's relevant to islands and oceans, then most likely we can include it in ours. And I know there are a few other organizations doing similar kind of combined agendas for different interest areas. So you might want to look at other organizations in your interest area, but there are none that immediately come to mind. Maybe other people have them, can share in the chat. Awesome. Anything else before we wrap up? Any other questions? I hope that was helpful to everyone. We just scratched the surface in terms of the different ways you can communicate. There's so many different directions, and would love to meet up with some of you there in person next week. Happy to talk about this some more. We will send out the links to the press release and the content calendar, as well as this recording, to everyone who registered. Feel free to share it with colleagues who also attended, anyone who might be interested and find it useful. And I really hope you're able to put some of these ideas into practice. If you are, then let us know. We'd love to hear post-COP, once you've had a chance to recover, how things go. I look forward to meeting some of you next week. Thanks so much, everyone. And see you in Egypt.